Thank you to Lucas and the others, Tomas, who connected me with this opportunity, and glad that you're all here. I think it's a great topic. I think it's great to have a conference like this, so I applaud everyone who's put in the work to do that. And when Tomas and I were talking about what's on my mind, I'll give you a little bit of background and then we'll jump into some of the content. For those who have either been in management or leadership positions, for those who have been Agile coaches, you may already know that the top reasons that an Agile adoption or an Agile transformation is struggling or failing is most commonly, according to surveys, the top 5 reasons over the last 10 years have been in some way connected to or related to leadership and management. So as much as we might focus on commonly doing Scrum right, is Scrum right, or should you use Kanban? There's other approaches, processes, and tools that are great, but the key to success, or the key problems you'll run into keeping you from success, will be tied to that core role. And it's no surprise, given that managers commonly ask, well, if someone else is responsible for making sure that the teams are busy and my people are busy with work, which is commonly the Scrum Master role, and if I'm not responsible anymore for making sure they're working on the right stuff, that's now the product owner, what do I do? And I used to be a manager, so I know what that felt like, to make sure my people were busy and make sure they're working on the right stuff. I've been an Agile coach now for probably 10 years. I was a Scrum Master for several years before that. And within the Scrum Alliance, a certified enterprise coach. So yes, I've helped with a number of transformations, helped lead several transformations, and we're currently helping 4 different companies with their transformations. And one pattern I see that's different is this idea of management and leadership being involved from the start. And that's partly out of preference, partly our request, but I think also companies are realizing there's an integral role that managers and leaders play to help ensure success, and that's usually where we're starting. So I'm going to walk you through just some of the core content I think is foundational for success, and what I'm drawing from is the course out of the Scrum Alliance called the Certified Agile Leadership, and there's other great courses and content out there as well, but I'll start with that because for me, I think that was my biggest aha several years ago. And then we'll frame out what other options there might be for you that could be of help to you in that. So I'll begin the slides now, which really the slides are just the core content out of Mural, and we're just going to be sliding across and discussing what those pieces are. I suppose if there's questions, Andy, do they put those in chat? I know we have time for questions at the end, but is there any interaction? They just have to wait.
There's no direct interactions, but participants are welcome to put questions to you in the chat in Gather, the tool we run the conference in, and I will transfer those questions to you. I will ask them during the Q&A by the end of your time box.
Great. Okay. Thank you. All right. And as of right now, how much time do we have left? I want to do a time check.
So it would be cool if you finish around 10 past the hour, 15 past the hour, then we'll have some time for questions.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So I'll begin with the content then. So I'm bringing up right now a very common graph. Some of you, certainly if you're in the Agile space for Agile coach, probably familiar with this, what's called the Stacy Matrix. And I commonly begin my conversations with management and leadership with this graph, because for me, what it really dials into is this idea of basically on our left, on the y-axis, what are we trying to do? Usually with software, but it could be any other complex project. We're trying to do something and we're not totally clear what that is. So when I hear people saying, we have problem with requirements, we have lack of clarity on requirements, the estimates are bad, that is, the developers didn't understand the requirements perhaps, then I'm thinking there's some uncertainty around the what. And I'm not surprised by that, I expect it. Customers commonly say, I'll know it when I see it. So I'm fine with that. Agile assumes that we're going to flex on scope. So that's not necessarily a problem. And then going along the x-axis on the bottom is our how uncertainty. Especially in the technology space, the technology is always changing. Even the fundamental patterns of what we apply architecture, moving from mainframe to client service, to internet, to web services, to microservices, right? So the technology space is always changing, and there's some uncertainty around that. And what we may agree to right now actually might not make sense in 6 months or 12 months. So that's partly why we have so many learners in the technology space. They do love to learn. There's lots of things to always be learning. But in the middle of this graph is we have some amount of uncertainty on the what and some amount of uncertainty on the how. The reason I'm sharing this is from a management perspective and from a leadership perspective, there's uncertainty in what we're trying to do. And they fundamentally need to accept that our plan-based approach, our capture all the requirements approach, lock in the scope, determine what we're doing, and then execute a plan against that is fundamentally flawed. And we know some of the statistics coming out of the Standish Chaos reports that only 10% of projects are successful with that approach. We might know that, but I would question whether most managers and leaders know that, because the reason that's so important for them is that now we're moving into a project, and especially consider very large projects or what we might call programs, very large efforts that now tap into resources across many different areas. And that's one aspect of the management and leadership role, is they're typically going across those groups. You could look at the Spotify model and how they use chapters and guilds to try to get this cross-cutting way of people working together, which I think is great. But what the bottom line is, if we take away the current structures, that is, all my people report up to me so I can answer the questions as a manager, let me clarify the what, let me clarify the how. That structure is gone. So what are we going to do in place of that? How should the manager act without those very firm definitions of their job and their role? So we're moving into uncertainty. The pace of change is only sped up year by year. And we see that certainly this year is the ability to respond to change. The average life of a company for here in the USA, on what we call the Fortune 500, has dropped by more than half. The companies just don't last as long. So the whole landscape is different. The way we're trying to accomplish work is different. And therefore, the role of this manager and leader is going to be different. So I'm trying to get them to accept that, let go of the way you've approached work in the past, let go of those tools and that mindset, and be willing to accept something else. Once we have that foundation set of this is the new world, we can there's a urgency or determination for what's in it for me to try to learn some new tool and approach. If anyone's worked with teams, we probably know that change is hard, and managing the rollout of the change is important. People in general don't like change. I don't like change. So we're expecting people who maybe have worked a certain way for a long time, we want them ready to change the way they work and get the ground ready for what that would look like. Once that's set, there's really two pieces we're going to approach this in. One is the leader's mindset, period. What kind of leader are they? And then secondly, how do we go about leading change, right? Give them the tools to lead change. And I think for the most part, one, they've never been questioned that their fundamental approach to how they work with others might not work in this new world. And two, they don't have the tools to try to lead change. And that one I've seen fairly consistently. They really don't know what it looks like to lead change. They don't fundamentally understand how Agile gets things done. And left to this uncertainty of not knowing and throwing a lot of change at me, I'm going to resist. This doesn't feel good. I don't feel like I'm adding value. I don't like what's happening here. I'm going to resist, right? So that's partly why I think we see some resistance in management, because we didn't lay that groundwork. And in all fairness, as much as we have a whole lot of certified Scrum Masters running around, we don't see a whole lot of certified managers out there. So there wasn't clear pathways for them anyway. So I don't think it's anyone's fault. It's not their fault. We just weren't set up to do this very well. So here we are. Let's talk about what that would look like to give them that kind of guidance. So I'm going to slide over to the core model from Leadership Agility. So Bill Joyner's what I would call a seminal work. It's been around for over a decade. It's been referenced a lot. I think it's really, really solid. Now, I'll take one step back and say, if you're going to help a leader to learn and grow, there's lots of ways you could do that. And you can even, mix and match these. They might overlap. So I'm not saying, hey, this is the model. I'm saying it's a model, and you can use other models as well. And if you're concerned or whether this is accurate or not, or is this really 100% fit for my manager, there's the great quote that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So there's some flaws in here, but I think it's really, really useful. And we've actually started several conversations now with leaders and organizations who, when they saw this model, that was their aha moment to realize, I see how our managers need to grow and change now, right? So I think there's some validity too in our own experience from that. So let's take a look and zoom in on this, which really we could look at as a funnel. So you can see the colors going from red to blue to green. No inherent meaning in those colors, just to kind of differentiate them clearly around what we're looking for. So the percentages at the top, what we're really doing is looking at all managers, anyone that would be out in the field today, and you can kind of fit them in 3 categories. There's actually more categories, but these ones cover most of them, and I think it's good enough. And for the most part, looking at the percentages, hopefully people identify themselves in one of them. So at the very bottom, the smallest, although it's the largest number, is the expert. Now, this is a person that maybe they were a great engineer, a great software developer, and they're so good at that we promoted them to manager. Now, we've seen this so many times that they were a great engineer. They had great skills around analysis, design, abstract thought, problem solving. People skills, yeah, not so much. Now, even in an engineering culture where I've seen there's a heavy focus on engineering, we're still dealing with people. So their way of relating with people skills isn't so great because they're the expert, right? They're the ones who know the most. So a lot of what they're trying to do is get those kind of results. They're most comfortable with one-on-one meetings. They're most comfortable giving orders, essentially, like, here's the, you have a problem, do this, right? I'm not saying it's mean, but they're being very directive because that's how they know how to function and get the results they want, right? So if there's a problem in front of them, they're going to solve it. Even though they might be in an office now and they have the title of manager, everything that comes in is still a problem for them to solve, just like it was when they were doing engineering. Okay, so you've experienced this in meetings, and here's one example where it'd be a problem. We come into a meeting to brainstorm on ideas, right? The team is self-organizing, and they're going to come up with their own design, right? The best architectures and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. You might recognize that from the Agile Manifesto. Well, the manager wants to join. It's his people, he might say, and he just wants to hear what's going on. So he hears these ideas being, thrown around, and in his mind, there is one right way, and he knows it. And so he's going to help by telling the team what they ought to do. What ends up happening in those situations is because someone's already saying, here's what you need to do, and they have a position of authority, you've just shut down the collaboration. And the team doesn't really have a choice except for execute against that person's opinion. And you've just lost, even if it's the right solution, and it may well be, you've just lost your collaboration. You've just lost this feel of how the team comes together. And they would know every time the boss is in the room, why don't you just tell us? Because you already know, or you think you know, but it doesn't matter. Just tell us, right? And so now the manager will walk away saying, you know what, I'm in these meetings, and they talk about Agile and collaboration and people, sharing ideas, self-organizing. I don't see it. Well, you don't see it because you are unaware that you walk in as the expert, and in your helpfulness, you solve problems for people, and they know their voice isn't going to matter anyway, so they just don't talk. Right? So that's one example you might see that come across as the expert. Very problem-solving mindset, very tactical, very task-oriented. They're not looking at the big picture necessarily. They're certainly not looking at the big picture of their people. They're not taking a long-term view of, what happens if I keep doing this? So I'll give one example from when I was a manager, and I would run around solving people's problems. But then I'd want to take a vacation. And my boss might say, well, where are you going? And I'm thinking, oh, he's so nice. He's asking, he wants to know like what I'm doing. He just wants to make sure I'm not going too far. He wants to make sure there's still cell phone reception so I can jump on the phone and solve problems, because he knows I'm the one that solves the problems, right? Or even if I was gone and I come back and then they ran into all these issues, what we would say here in America, the wheels came off the bus, right? It just blew up. I might actually say, yeah, well, that's what happens when I'm not around. I'm pretty important. But if that's the case, I'm also so important that I can't be promoted. I can't move over to that other department that I could have, had an opportunity there for my career, because this team needs me so much. It's evident when I'm not around, things fall apart, right? So that's partly because I was always the expert, and in my helpfulness, solved the problems for them and literally coached them to wait for me to come back, right? And I'd have people say that, well, I didn't want to do anything without you checking it first. And so they sat idle for a day or two, waiting for me to approve something or do something like that. So as much as I would get frustrated, or I'd even say, seriously, guys, you couldn't take care of this yourself. Am I a babysitter here? I mean, is this babysitting where I have to watch, but I was the one that was actually causing that kind of behavior, right? As the expert. So be watching for that. Maybe they move on from that and they become what we call the achiever. And by the way, if you see the statistics, every other manager we're dealing with is probably an expert at some level. That's their mindset of how they operate. And in all fairness, that's how they see their usefulness, is being the smartest person in the room who can solve all these problems for people, right? Get things done. Why are you guys still talking, right? So that's a lot of them. They might move up to achiever. The achiever is still outcome oriented, like they want to get things done, but they do know that it's through people. But so I might not solve your problem, but I know who you need to talk to, right? Go down and talk to Robert, right? Go talk to Tomas. He'll help you. So I'm connecting people. It's a little like an orchestra with the conductor, right? So yes, they're the ones playing the instruments, but I'm guiding their every step. I'm making sure they follow. So if I know what the solution is, I want you to buy into that. All right. And sometimes it can be manipulative. Sometimes I'm not even thinking of it. I think I have the right idea. And I do want you to buy in to support that. Whereas the expert simply says, this is what you need to do. I don't really care about, your opinion, because I know it's the right thing. I'm not mean. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. I had one leader say that people getting upset about his decisions, that was just collateral damage, right? So people get upset, big deal, right? The achiever knows it matters, so let me get them to buy in. But I'm not organically getting buy-in on just the best idea. I'm trying to manufacture buy-in to my idea, right? So I'm shaping some of that, and I'm coordinating people and connecting people in that way to make those things happen. Back to the long-term view, the systems view, I'm probably seeing more of that. So I might move from tactical to more project-based work. Maybe I can see strategically a little bit what should happen, so that horizon's working more. And I probably have more self-awareness than the expert. I know maybe I came across harsh in that one, right? And I'll fix that coming across the wrong way. I'll fix it because that's getting in the way of me getting the things I want done. Right? Not necessarily because it's best for how we work together, or I'm creating an environment where that can happen. If it's getting in the way of getting results, I don't want that. Yes, I'll address how I come across too harsh in meetings. So those are better. And I think we would see a lot of people at this level. Your organization might look at the achievers and say, they're really good. See how they work with people, see how they get things done. See how they know how to network, right? It could be seen as political at times. They know how to, work with these other people to get things done as well. So your organization actually might think, this is wonderful that we have all these achievers here as well. The limitation to that is you'll still never get organic self-organization. You'll still never get the best architectures and designs from self-organizing teams, emergent architecture. You'll never get necessarily innovation, because if I don't have an amazing idea, we're probably not going to get an amazing idea, because I'm not tapping in to others in that way. So we'll lose out on some of the fundamentals of why I think that we really see the Agile can do such amazing things, because the Agile is really based on that principle of self-organization. And I would add to that, empowered teams, empowered because their voice matters. If I bring on this crazy idea and the team goes for it, it can yield phenomenal results. If I'm still saying, yeah, I don't think the boss is going to necessarily buy into it because it's different from his idea, I cut off a lot of the innovation at its very foundation. Brene Brown had said something I thought was really good. And Brene Brown's an author here in the US who's written a lot about vulnerability. But she'd made this point that innovation depends on vulnerability. It's hard to share your idea because you're taking a risk putting something new out there in front of others and seeing what they think. So in this case, we're not going to get that because even if the achiever is a really wonderful person, I still know my idea isn't what my boss is, what my boss wants. So it's not going to get voted up. So why take that risk, right? Why bring up something that I know will not get approved, or I know will get shot down in the meeting itself? So we're going to miss out on innovation. I bring up innovation in particular because we have a lot of companies who say we need to be more innovative. And as much as I appreciate lots of work you can do out there to get innovation and the tools, in the end, a lot of Agile depends on this coming from the teams that would get you innovation from the ground up. But if your leader doesn't work with people in that way, you're only trying to bake in innovation from the outside, from a consultancy, from some process to get there. You'll try to give people rewards if they come up with innovative ideas, right? So you're incenting them to try to do something, but you're pushing it from the outside in, and it's fundamentally going to be at a loss. I think we all want innovation. People have been talking about for many years. Why don't we see more of it? I actually think this is one of the foundational reasons why we don't see more of it. The way the leader, the way the manager works with the teams, and inadvertently cuts the vulnerability off that they would be willing to say those things and share those things because the leader already has the best idea. So just be watching for that. So if you look at just between those first two, the expert and the achiever, that is the majority of management out there. We're roughly at 90%. Moving on beyond that, this is the core piece that we're trying to move our leaders towards, what we call a catalyst leader. They're deeper in self-awareness and what they want, and they're deeper in systems view and in the time horizon. So let me walk back through those. So the catalytic leader already knows that they don't have necessarily the best idea, although they can certainly add information to it. They know the best ideas lie within the people. So if I know that the ideas are with my people, how do I get that out? Well, here's where we slide right back into what I think a lot of us already know and recognize the value of, and that's acting like a coach. It's a classic thing of someone coming up and saying, there's something wrong with the server, what should we do? And flipping it right back to them. Well, do you have some ideas, right? And now we're turning back to coaching where they might bring out ideas. I might give some questions like, okay, have you tried that before? What would that look like? Who else should we talk to? I can still follow up with more questions that try to refine the idea and feel good about it. I'm not just flipping them and saying, run with whatever you think, right? There's a reason I'm in the position I'm in. It's usually because I have a lot of knowledge and experience. But I turn that knowledge and experience into questions that force them to do the thinking. Or as Jim Collins, a famous author here, said, we want them to become clock builders and not you be a time teller. I can solve your problem, but the next time you need to know the time, you're going to come right back to me again. I need to make you into a clock builder so you can tell the time yourself. So I have this long-term view that over 6 months, a year, my people will be able to solve, right? The classic thing of they would have done the right thing even if I wasn't there. But that takes time and that takes coaching and that mindset and that way of thinking, the tools that I have to give to them that they would have done just that. So there's self-awareness that I might have all these answers, but I don't want to solve theirs. I know that it lies within them. So I'm going to act as a coach, which is a new stance for me as a manager. And I know it's going to take some time. So I'm not looking for immediate results. Back to leadership's support of this is, are they aware that we'll need to slow down to speed up? And we've said that before on the ways the team works building software. But I would say for management and leadership to be effective with Agile, we also have to slow down and speed up. There's no way I learned how to start acting like a coach when I've been a manager for 20 years, and I'm going to be amazing in just 1 week, right? I don't care what the training is. It's going to take some time, right? So just that awareness of that kind of time horizon to flip that script, right? There's some notes there you can see at the bottom where we commonly see we're moving from or and kind of this competitive mindset, my idea or your idea, and if it's your idea, I lose. So this idea of collaborative win-win. How can we change the conversation? So I'm bringing other people's ideas and coming up as a group with the best idea. That's partly that mindset as well that they bring in, like, it doesn't have to be my way. And in fact, we might learn more from failure, even if I'm right. We might learn more from failure. If we fail, we'll fail safe. I think we all recognize that. As a manager, I can kind of let go of some of that need to be right then and say, it's better that you guys would learn on your own and figure this out than you rubber stamp my idea and agree with my idea. So that's really our cone of the core of this. I'm going to touch on how would that look like then to say, what's the manager going to do as far as the toolbox? And then I think we'll be right near the end in time for some questions. So let me slide over and bring up really the tools that we use the most. I've already mentioned one of them, which is this idea of outside in. So in the outside in approach, I'm trying to push in this agile view, an agile way of working. Let me zoom in to see three concentric circles. Some of you might be familiar with Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and it's a little bit like that. What we're trying to do in the bottom, you see, is like come in and say, oh, you want to go agile? Let's put your people on these scrum teams. Let's find out who your scrum master is and get them trained. Who's your product owner? Great. Scrum it up, go, right? But this way of working where we trust the team, where the ideas emerge from the team, well, they'll figure it out. That hasn't flipped. So now we're trying to jam in a way of working that the manager isn't familiar with, the manager's not aware of. And we start with the process and we form structures around that. But the culture maybe never really changed. And we've had plenty of people say, yeah, our culture, we need to work on our culture. We've had some problems, right? We're too competitive. It's kind of hurting the collaboration, et cetera. So we try to push in this from the outside in, and it doesn't stick. We've seen companies basically as antibodies. They'll push out what doesn't fit for them and protect the culture that they've known for so many years. Whereas in this case, I'll slide over now, that I think is a central part of this that really was for me one of the ahas, as well as that cone. And this is just a simple looks like a graph. And all we're doing is we're mapping out a culture, right? Is this a collaborative culture? Is it an innovative create culture? Is it a blue, very competitive culture? Is it a red structure and process culture? So for example, a bank might be very structured, very risk averse, and rightfully so, whereas a brand new company might be very innovative and try out new ideas. The reason I'm sharing this, it doesn't matter. I'm not looking for a right or a wrong, but if you know what your culture is and that there's challenges that you're not getting the results you want, the outcomes you want, well, what do you want to become? Right? So we'd map that out and say, what do you want to become? Well, we want to become more innovative. In this case, that picture, that's what we're doing. They're sliding from being not very green, and you see the dashed line where they want to become more green. So once we have the right people in the room who understand fundamentally our culture is not where we want it, and I do it as simple as asking people their personality traits and have them stand in corners of the room. And you can just see by grouping, wow, most of you are very red. Right? You want systematic, safe approach. You want to roll out, but how do you innovate when you're afraid to take risks, right? So we would want to talk about what that could look like. So now that we have their map of that, I'll jump ahead to the last piece of this that gives you at least an idea, like what would that look like? Bring over a set of experiments. Give me one moment. I'm going to pull up the other piece of this and run through just a very quick example. And I'm literally bringing up the pieces that we would use. So in this case, you can kind of see we have the graphs of what we'd say, what do you want to become? And I would look at one, in this case, this is a culture that needs to move. And you see our graph there on the to the left. They need to become more structured, right? So there's a startup company we'd work with that literally had sold more work that they could do. The processes weren't consistent. It was very chaotic, reactionary. Yes, they could get results, but it was just a crazy, chaotic environment at times. They needed more process and structure. What could they do? So in the middle, you see these green cards. These are literally experiments they ran. I just want to pause for a moment saying Agile is a whole host of things you can do. Really, Agile is just a core set of values. What you do looks different at every company, doesn't it? So we can learn from Spotify and we can learn from ING, we can learn from Netflix and Google and others, but what works for your company is probably going to look somewhat different. So we could pick that. And I think actually ING is a great case study where they looked at several companies and then they made their own. I don't want to rent someone else's solution. I don't necessarily want consultants coming in and saying, this is what works. Why? Because it worked at this other company. Yeah, but that other company is very different from us. I don't know if that will fit here. Much better to organically build it yourself of what works there. And in this case, this is what they did. So if I'm trying to get systematically better in our processes, these are the things that they did. A policy of 0 defects, a structure of T-shaped team members who can do lots of things, so we don't have bottlenecks that would end up hurting our quality. We didn't have enough testers, right? Because the devs wouldn't test. Well, that's going to hurt your control, and that's going to be a risk, wouldn't it? Smaller teams, so that they're more nimble and they can respond faster. That will help ensure better quality. That will help address risks. Moving away from job titles and breaking down silos, so we're working more cohesively. So all the right people can apply what they know and what they do faster, smoother to address those concerns and risks. Instead of saying, imagine the risk of someone saying, hey, did you check the server's configuration file? Yeah, not my job, right? That's a risk, isn't it? So I think the more titles we have, the less responsibility we have. That's something that Craig Larman would say I thought was really good. So they're smoothing those out. So that's one set of experiments that they ran. But here's the point, coming all the way back around to your leader. If your leader understands that there's not one right way to try to execute a project, even projects within the same company, and I need to empower my people so that they figure it out themselves, and how do I support them doing that? Then I probably need to be learning those things myself so I can be a better coach to my people and empower them to figure these things out themselves. And then once they figure it out themselves, they're closest to the work, so there'll be better solutions. They'll be more empowered because it was their ideas. They'll get more support to make it happen and be successful. And I didn't do anything except for know these things that are tools out there and have powerful conversations with my team members, asking great questions that they figured out themselves, right? And I'm working across the other managers to do the same and act as a cohesive group to execute against that work, right? So that's a very thin and fast glance, but you get an idea how it's fundamentally different from just grabbing some, framework and throwing it at the solution and say, let's figure that out. It's a long play. It means you got to up your game as managers and continue to learn. But I think it's fundamentally the right approach to do. All right. So that runs us through our time. You got an idea of the leader's growth and the tools and the way that they would actually lead change within the organization as well. I'll pause there for now in case there's any questions and check with Andy.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Scott. There are some questions, and just as a reminder to participants, you can still ask them in the chat inside the Gather tool, and I will gather them from there and bring them to Scott. And let's start with the first one which just came. When you make some actions to shape the culture, how to check the results? How do you know that the change actually happened?
Great. Yeah. So this is, I'll give you two answers. One, the official answer, and then you can decide on what you think of the second answer. We get asked a lot about metrics and measurements, and I think that's great. I think metrics are important, and I think metrics can get out of control. And then the bottom line, the reason I'll say the first one, and then you can decide what you think, is that as many times as we've had conversations about metrics, in the end, most of our customers never really take the time to follow through and execute it, to do any of that, or even from the start. Well, great kickoff meetings about metrics, but they don't really I think in the end, they know they're just trying to get things done. They'll know it when they see it as well. So I'm not saying no to that. I'm just saying I've inadvertently put a lot of time into metrics that in the end they didn't actually care about. They said they did, but in the end it didn't really matter. I'll come back to your main question of how do we check culture? So if culture, some people say culture is just how you act. Culture is just how we behave. Culture is how we get things done around here, right? This is the way we work. So if I'm saying I'm trying to shift, here's some good ones. You actually see we pointed it out in the content we go through with the leaders, and that is, what's a metric? Well, here's some metrics right here. Time to market. So if you're saying you're trying to get better quality, time to market's going to help with that. Or certainly a metric around 0 defects. We can measure those. If we slide down, just a couple other ones that are great metrics as well. In this case, they're trying to get more collaboration. So you can have a core metric of how many Scrum of Scrums have we had. We're measuring how many people show up for the Scrum of Scrums, how many people show up for the retrospective, how many items come out of the retrospective. So whatever I think is important, I I don't know if there's a right one, but look for metrics that would be an indicator of it. And I don't overthink it. I think it's a little bit like when we try to estimate. Good enough is good enough, right? The fact that I might measure the number of meetings with our Agile rollout group, or I might measure the number of events we've had, the number of people. One company measured how many people are going to these Agile conferences, right? We say we want to keep learning. Well, let's see how many conferences they've gone to, and internal events that we've hosted ourselves. So that's what I would start with. Get together the group and say, if we wanted more innovation, what are ways we could measure that? And just throw out a few, vet those, and then run them. But just like we do with Agile, inspect and adapt, I would come back within just a few months and say, are these working for us? Do we need to change them? Is there something else we should be doing? Because that's usually the direction that's gone. But you've got some ideas out there. If you Google and look around at a couple of other larger frameworks, you'll see lots of ideas for metrics that are starting points. I don't think I would necessarily use them, or all of them certainly, but you get an idea. And once you feel like, no, I get an idea of how we might measure things, come back to the cultural map and say, okay, what would that look like then for a culture that is getting more results, like the blue culture, and be very specific about that particular culture behavior you want, not just generic metrics. Metrics of a company that's more innovative, or like I said, more results oriented, et cetera, and see how that might work for you.
Okay. Another question from our participants: suggestions for coaching a leader, like a department lead or a C-level executive who is very much an expert in the expert leading style as you described it. How to make such a person see the benefits of a different approach?
Oh, yes. I wish that was easier. So I will give you my common one, and I bet that you already know this if you've coached others, is I still start with what's in it for me. So I will say things like, essentially, hey, you realize your whole company's going Agile, right? Or you realize the CEO said we're going Agile, right? One, I want to make sure you heard it from people more important than you that we're going this direction, right? Okay, how do you feel about that? Right, I want to know. And secondly, like, what would a win look like for you? So I don't mind that I literally start some of these conversations of, hey, how can we help your career get even better? How can we help you get that next promotion? How can we make you look good? So some of this in their mindset, it's the validation that they're still adding value. If I start to feel like I'm not adding value anymore, my behavior will not be awesome. My behavior might get erratic. I might be, I've had them in meetings get aggressive, get loud, right? Because they're being threatened in their core sense of, what do I do here that matters? And that's really hard for them. So I do want to start with, hey, we're going to help you win. All right. And if they feel like, yes, I'm behind them, we want to help them win, then I might give them a very quick overview, enough that they understand of the fact that Scrum and Agile are really learning tools. We're trying to figure it out, that there's not a right answer. If they fundamentally understand there's not a right answer, then we're good. Because from there on, I'll say, well, it sounds like we'll need to figure out X, Y, and Z. That is, you don't know, and I'm not going to tell you, but we need to figure that out together. Let's learn. And then the process simply becomes, every time we're working together, how did that go towards helping the team learn that? How did you feel that went, that they came up with an idea themselves? And sometimes I simply have to say, just please don't say anything in this meeting and just watch what happens. I'll give you permission to overrule any of their ideas afterwards, but let's watch their behavior when you purposely don't say anything, and then tell me afterwards what you observed. And I think sometimes when they step out into the observer role, they might realize, like, oh, yeah, I never noticed that before. Why? Because before I showed up in the meeting to get something done. Now I asked me to show up to a meeting and just observe. I can't do my problem solving, so I'm forced into a different role, and they can actually see some of that. Ideally, what we like to do is you do an assessment, so they just see in black and white. Oh, I see that I think that I actually facilitate conversations really well, but all of my team members say I dominate the conversation every time, right? Part of the issue, consider this real quick. I'm just going to take a moment on this one, Andy. Consider for a moment that a lot of our leaders, especially at the higher levels, they're there because they're very decisive, right? They made things happen. They got stuff done. And in all fairness, sometimes at the cost of how other people felt, right? Well, they said we had to do mandatory overtime. my boss said I had to come in this weekend. I'm not asking you how you feel about coming the weekend. I know how you feel about coming the weekend, right? I'm purposely shutting off that ability to feel what you think, because otherwise I couldn't make things happen. And because I make things happen and get results, guess who gets promoted? So if you watch what's going to the top, what you're finding is more people who intentionally or not, they're not as sensitive to the feelings of others, and they get results. So whenever we come to them saying, hey, leader, we got this wonderful thing. It's going to really be collaborative. We're going to find out how people feel. We're going to hold hands and get naked and sing. Like they don't want anything to do with that. They want results. That's how they're wired. And then honestly, that's how they got to that position. We can help them do that better. But I'm not trying to sell them on collaboration. That doesn't matter to them. They can get the results whether we collaborate or not. So I got to start with what's in it for them, and then say, if you really want those results, here's a way we can get you that even better, and then begin the coaching process with those tools. I hope that's of some help. Great question.
Now, I also hope it is for the person who asked the question, but I have a perverse question. So you say that leaders are decisive but not very empathic. So can you demonstrate examples of leaders who get results while being empathic and less decisive? Because maybe that's what it takes to get results.
Right. Yes. So I want to make sure I'm hearing you right. Leaders who are empathic and still get results, right?
Yeah. Do we have examples? Because you see, those people who rise to the top because they are decisive and pushy, I would even say, they have a long list of role models in management history in modern times, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I'll give the example from some time over at Yahoo, and Yahoo had a leader from who came up from Google, Marissa Mayer. And there's a couple things I was picking up while I was there, and it's actually each example you gave. So one thing is, so when we'd be doing our training, I would have literally large chunks of the class asking to leave because they didn't want to miss her all hands meeting. And you think Yahoo's pretty big, right? So an all hands meeting, like, oh yeah, the room's totally packed. If we don't get there early, we can't even see her. People are standing up on like the pillars so they can just see her. Imagine like these giant crowds. So she's taking time to basically just hear from the people, right? Imagine the CEO and the other things that she could be doing. She had a regular meeting, just having everyone get together and ask her questions, right? So I think that's empathic. She's taking time for that. The other example I thought was really striking is right away, I was noticing that people's attitudes were changing in the class. And so I said, is this because of your new CEO? And they said, yeah, like she's really getting things done. Like, really? Okay, so you guys are changing how you do project management? Did you do something with the PMO? Are you doing Agile more? Like, no. She made it so in parking lot D, you don't have to use your card to get in there anymore, just like parking lot E, right? It was as simple as, she made things happen that we were trying to get done forever. Like, why do I need to swipe my card to get in that parking lot, but not in this one? Can't you make that easier? A CEO just drops down, says, fix that. And now they can get into that parking lot easier. This is not crazy complicated stuff. So they're referencing she gets things done, and they're referencing she wants to hear us. Even if nothing's necessarily happening right now, she takes time for us to get together and hear us. I thought that was really striking as one example for getting those things done. I'll give you one more example. I thought, well, I'll give you two examples that I think are really powerful. So I recently got off the phone call with a manager that I think is one of the best managers I've ever worked with. And I said, it's so hard to push change through and yet listen to your people. And he told this story about how they weren't getting enough automation going. So he did a couple of things. One is he got approval by pushing from the product owner that they need to agree that a certain percentage of all tests have to be automated. So it became policy. At the political level, he made it happen. So now we have to have a certain amount of automation. Then he came back on his teams, which teams are like, well, how are we going to hit that percentage with all this demand on us to deliver results for features? And he would work with the teams to have structures. So they would rotate through essentially an automation team that would just do all the tests and then go back and support the other teams to implement those tests that they'd kind of created and with the scripts. But he worked along with those teams on how can we best implement that? Who should be on that team? What would that look like? What tools? He's asking them all those questions at the tactical level while working at the top to push policy change to enable that to actually happen and give them air cover. He would commonly be in the meetings with the tech teams, listening, not giving his advice. Afterwards, he'd have a one-on-one and say, well, did you consider what that might look like for the other team in terms of what they're using the microservices for? He wouldn't do it in the meeting. His team members always look great in the meeting, but he would coach them in the one-on-one so they came back smarter next meeting. And he got great results as well. I think he was one of the more effective ones in that level. So that's a lower level manager and the CEO level where I think it can happen. But to be honest, Andy, I look back at the folks I've worked with, I'm like, yeah, there wasn't one at that company. There wasn't one I met at that company. I don't see them very often. And when I do, I make a note, like that's a great example of what we want to see.
Yeah, okay. So one example that I always give is this, the CEO of Spotify, because most people don't even know his name. So another question coming from our participants: how to progress with Agile transformation with no empowerment from the leadership, thinking they know best how to do it?
Oh, that one is a really hard one. And by the way, Andy, I'll second what you say, because everything I've read about Spotify and the coaches has been really very much that he actually admits that, hey, they came up with some of these great ideas, like Discover Weekly. That wasn't my idea. I love it. I love it. So yeah, when there's no empowerment, I've wrestled with this, and I'll be honest, you're catching me in the middle of my thinking of if I could just be transparent and honest, and I don't want to discourage you, but I kind of say, will it work? It's almost like what we call here a DTR in America, define the relationship. Like, are we even headed towards the same things in this relationship, and should we continue? Because without that support, what I've seen is you'll put in a lot of work and you'll care a lot and you'll have late nights and lose sleep, and you may not get results. Even statistically, we'd look and say it's going to be hard to get results. But without that top level, you don't ever get to the point where they will give you the things that, think of everything that the team brings up in the retrospective that the team can't handle themselves. It's outside the team. And I immediately think that's where you act as an organizational change agent to try to bring that change about. But if you don't have their support to get more, QA team members to let's be honest about, I recently talked to a team and like, oh yeah, we already know the date's completely unrealistic. And like, well, then what you need to have that conversation with management and have a, what we call a come to Jesus meeting, like tell them it's just not we just can't do that by that date, but here's what we can do, right? But if you can't have that kind of conversation, I feel like the struggle is you'll never basically get what you need. So I would almost stop at times, and this is where I'm wondering, like, okay, so what would you do? I don't want to give up. I really believe it's important that you continue to hope, even if nothing else. Your team needs to know that you still hope things can get better. So I'm challenging you personally, don't give up on hope. That's a core need of all employees, that things really can change around here. You might try another tactic, right? Bring in another voice, what we say, get behind the guru. Hey, there's this speaker coming to our town. It'd be great if he came and did a lunch and learn, right? Sometimes they hear it from someone else, like, that guy's got a great idea. Like, it's the same idea I've been saying for 5 years, right? But they'll hear it from the outsider, perhaps. Invite them to the conferences, put the book on their table. It's almost like the shotgun approach that lots of product management folks use. If we throw out lots of ideas and we see what sticks. But I look back. So John Deere's whole transformation started, or Mitchell International, their whole transformation started because they heard from the guys from John Deere at a conference. We work with a nutraceuticals company that their whole transformation started because the CEO read the book, Twice the Work in Half the Time by Jeff Sutherland. One of our clients, their whole transformation started because they saw the Salesforce slide deck, A Year of Living Dangerously, and just saw the crazy results they got and got inspired by that, right? So there's lots of ways it could start. And you might simply try other approaches that they get the idea, like, oh, we could get really great results if we do what? Oh, listen to you? Okay, right? But I'm going to come around other ways to get them that willingness to do that. If they're experts and they already think they know, I can't win that. What I can win is, hey, there's these great results. Oh, and they did something different than what you know? Let's take a look at that. And I can help you learn that stuff, right? I still make them look good, but now you become their ally to figure out how did Spotify do, guilds, chapters, you know what I mean? So just consider that. And here's my new challenge that I've been giving to people in the classes is you should know, 3 to 5 good case studies. And I don't mean case studies like, oh, they use SAFe. I mean case studies like, here's how the whole transformation started. here's the problems they ran into, and here's how they solved those problems. And you'd be able to say that in like 1 to 5 minutes for several of them, because what that gives you is real stories. They can't argue with real stories. No, that really is what Spotify did, right? And they really did get results. And secondly, that there's differences, that there is not one way. Every one of these companies did something different, right? So that forces them to think there's not, not one right way. Okay, so now maybe I don't have the one right way, so what do we need to do? So consider that as well. And for the most part, storytelling is really powerful, even for those leaders, and I think that might be an option for you there as well. I hope those are some ideas, at least, that might help.
So thank you for a comprehensive answer. Unfortunately, we don't have time left for other questions. There was at least one still waiting. Do you intend to log in together and mingle with participants and meet them?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so please, Adam and others who might still have questions, you can meet Scott in the conference space. I would say soon, because he has to disconnect from our Zoom backend and connect together. I have one more technical question. Will you share a link to the mural you have shown with the participants? Is it accessible?
Yeah, well, let me put together just the pieces we need from this.
Okay.
And then I'll send you a link.
Yep, send that to the organizers, and we'll sure it gets to the participants. Now, thank you very much for your presentation and the comprehensive answers to the questions that came from our participants, and also 1 or 2 of mine. Thank you so much. Hope to meet you sometime in the future, maybe in person. So thank you so much.